And we are live. Another episode of the Let's Debate podcast. My name is Nick Delahanty. I'm going to jump right into things. Bring in my co-host Kyle Delahanty. Kyle, how you doing?
I'm doing well. I said it last week. These weeks are flying by. And if you've been tuning in the past few weeks, you know how get things started. At first, we'd just like to thank everyone for tuning into last week's episode, and thanks for interacting with us. We always appreciate it. And obviously, if you haven't tuned in yet, you can see our website. It's on the page in front of you, anchor.fm/Let's Debate. You can check out our previous episodes. And if you've noticed, the past 3 weeks and actually 4 of our first 5 weeks, we've actually been speaking about football a lot. But this isn't a football show, right? This is a sports show. So for this week, we're actually excited to kind of go in a different direction here and talk about a topic that we feel is really interesting and especially very relevant for the time right now, and that's college basketball. But I don't want to jump too deeply into it. Just wanted to get that out there, and I'm going to let Nick get the ball rolling with everything.
Yeah, so, before we get into the topic, again, social media feeds listed below us. Delahanty Media is our Instagram account. If you followed us already, pretty cool stuff we had going on there. As you found us already on Facebook, we thank you for tuning in. Let's Debate Podcast. We're live on Facebook every Thursday night at 8 o'clock. And then on Twitter at Let's Debate Pod. Now, the exciting thing that we added to the top of the screen is our new website, Delahanty Media. I actually have some of our gear on, as you can see. Again, I really did a bad job of showing that. Let me try that again. And you can see kind of the gear. We'll be selling some gear. If you want to go check that out, go ahead. I will be adding some Let's Debate shirts for you to help us spread the word for our show. Put in the code Let's Debate for 10% off tonight as a special treat to our listeners. Now, Kyle mentioned it already. We love talking football, of course, because we're both Jet fans, and who else doesn't love to talk about the terrible things the New York Jets like to do? But tonight's topic is really interesting, and we're going to dive into college basketball. And there's been a lot of talk recently with the creation of the G League and the one and done rule that the college basketball landscape is going to change. And again, we are living in a time where we see how the one and done is really impacting our world. So before we get into anything, I want to hear Kyle's opinion on the one and done rule in college basketball.
Yeah, so I'm actually not a big fan of the one and done rule. I absolutely love college basketball. And what I really enjoyed when I was growing up was, although the one and done had kind of, I think it really began during the 2005 NBA draft. It was after the 2004 NBA draft where players were able to forego college and jump straight into the NBA. Now, what the one and done rule does is it actually mandates players to spend 1 year in college, and in this case it's college basketball. So I personally don't like how these top recruits land in college basketball, stay for a year because they have to, and then they jump to the NBA draft and start their professional careers. I loved when I grew up watching college basketball where teams really were able to keep players and create chemistry and kind of build their reputation and build teams where, as a North Carolina fan, I watched the 2009 team, the same starting five pretty much through 2007, 2008, and 2009. That was fun as a fan. But I understand pushing a fan's perspective away. If I'm trying to put myself in those players' shoes, I understand completely as to why they would make the move to leave college and go grab the money while they can going to the NBA.
And now, I'm in the same boat as you. And as you can see on our screen, we have some video buzzer beater highlights showing for you as we talk about this debate. I am with you in the fact of I don't like the one and done rule. And the reason why is, as a fan, you want to grow with that program, and you want to grow with the guys that you're watching on a daily basis. Seeing them for 1 year, it feels like a rental. Like, I personally would have loved to seen Kobe White another year at Carolina. A lot of people would have loved to have seen Zion Williamson at Duke for a longer period of time. And unfortunately, like you said, the finances come into play. And that's where the new G League is coming into play and is really going to impact some of the top recruits in the high school game. And I know you did some research on the G League, so I want you to fill our viewers in on what you learned about the G League over your research.
Yeah, so the G League's actually it's kind of been in the news lately because of some of the big signings that they've made and some big decisions that high school prospects made recently to join the G League. If you're unfamiliar with the G League, it was actually called the D League a few years back, right? And it's the NBA, it's the NBA's minor league like system in a sense, where if you watch baseball, players go through Double A, Triple A, and eventually they're able to be called up to be professional baseball players playing in the MLB. In this case, for the NBA, G League's their minor league system, and what the G League is now doing is it's kind of creating this new professional path for high school prospects to forego college and actually join their league. And they're giving certain contracts out, and they're called select contracts, and they only go to elite prospects. And obviously, those elite prospects are those top prospects out of high school. It's not every player you could think of. There are certain players, and these select contracts are allowing players to earn $125,000 for a 5-month season. And along with that, those players need to at least be 18 years of age by September 15th, going into that season that we're talking about. Now, the difference between this minor league system and a minor league system like baseball is these players joining this league cannot go straight to the NBA. They cannot be called up, right? They need to still enter the draft. The benefits of joining this league, aside from the pay, is that all 30 NBA teams are able to scout you at games and practices. So you're getting a lot more exposure. And then on top of that, the off-the-court benefits of this league is the fact that they're offering academic scholarships, life skills training, mentorship programs. So, like I said, from a fan's perspective, I don't want to see it affect college basketball, but I think it's going to. And I think if you're one of these elite prospects, I can't blame you at all for taking that opportunity and jumping on the money and the benefits that come with it.
Yeah, and you when you're in high school and you're seeing that money be thrown at you, basically, that's enticing, especially given that you don't know a person's background or what their family's dealing with. Those finances might help a family. We're in tough times in the world, and people are struggling, and that high school athlete might say, this is really going to help my family out. This is the right move for me. Now, and again, going to college would help too, because it would help lead toward getting an education. But in the long run, if you're there for 1 year, if you're essentially saying to yourself, I'm going for 1 year and I want to go into the NBA draft, what benefit is really that doing for you when, like you said, you could be getting into a mentorship program in the NBA through the G League. You could be facing NBA caliber type of players. You're playing older, stronger, faster players. You can kind of use that as a transition year. So it is enticing. But I think that the NCAA has to kind of rebuttal this a little bit to try to get guys to stay or go to college in that aspect. Look at baseball. Out of high school, you could get drafted, but if you don't declare for the draft and sign, you're staying 3 or 4 years at that college unless you go the JUCO route, which is junior college. Now, same thing in regards to the NFL. They're not allowed to even think about the draft till after junior year. So I think that college basketball has to really make a stance on this and figure out something to try to entice players. College is the right way to go.
Right, and kind of like piggybacking off that a little bit, I really like to focus not even so much on the money part of it, but I think what's also enticing about it for these prospects coming out of high school is, what opportunity are you getting aside from playing basketball in college? You're having the opportunity to go to these classes and start your journey of getting a degree. Even though some of these top prospects aren't actually probably going to finish the 4 years and earn their degree at the actual college, like physically being there. But what the G League's allowing you to do is it's also offering academic scholarships. So you're now allowing players to go play for a professional system in a sense. If you look up some of these names that we're about to name in a little bit, they're considered professional basketball players now because they decided to commit themselves to the G League. But now you're allowing $125,000 and an opportunity to take online classes. I mean, that's a win-win. So, yeah, like you said, NCAA is going to have to try to figure out a way to win some of these players over. And it's going to be really interesting to see how this all plays out. And it's starting to pick up steam right now. So,
yeah, it's starting to pick up steam, like you said, and I'm interested to see. Do you have any suggestions as to what college basketball can do? We've seen John Calipari year in and year out recruit guys considering that they're going to be there for 1 year. You see how the big dogs of the ACC and Coach K and Coach Williams have really changed the way that they've evaluated players and have in turn recruited players. You could go down the list of guys who you didn't think were going to be one and dones and that are one and dones or even there for just 2 years. So how could college basketball kind of answer this enticing situation that the G League's offering these players?
I'm not sure they could even answer that question yet, but what I'll say is, and it's good that you mentioned John Calipari, because I feel like John Calipari is the guy who really got this going. He really got the one and done going. One and done's been there since, like I said, I believe 04, 05, but it wasn't until that 2010 Kentucky team with John Wall, Eric Bledsoe, DeMarcus Cousins, they took over college basketball. They didn't win a championship, but everyone knew about them. And they had, I believe it was 5 first-round draft picks that year, and 4 of those guys were true freshmen. So he kind of changed the landscape of college basketball, and now that's the norm. But like you were saying, I think the only way the NCAA could kind of try to keep up with the G League and paying players is by paying college players. And we know that, I believe that law might have been passed in California. I don't know when those players are going to start getting paid. I don't know how much they're going to make. And I don't necessarily really agree with paying these college players. I could understand it from a certain, standpoint. But at the same time, to me, I think their payment is you getting, for the players who get those full rides, they are paying you because they're paying for you to go to school for free. And it's up to you to make the most out of that. And you're having an opportunity to go to school for 4 years if you feel it's necessary, and you want to take the risk of maybe not getting, maybe take the risk of getting injured along the way without going to grab money right away. So I think the only way they could really keep up with it is paying these players, but they're going to have to decide how much.
I'm fully in the same boat with you in regards to my stance on paying the players. I think that if you're getting a full ride scholarship to go to one of these prestigious schools, that's a really enticing situation, because at the end of the day, you're not only improving or growing as a basketball player in most cases, but you're ending up with your degree if you stay at that school for 4 years. Now, a lot of the guys that it does impact are the ones that are there for 1 year. Now, and we talked about it before the show, there's a handful of guys that you can really pick out and you could say, they've really made a name for themselves in college basketball, but do they really have a long-term NBA opportunity? And the one that stands out to me, and because, again, we see a lot of Carolina games, is Garrison Brooks. The guy absolutely dominated this year for the Tar Heels. He had a really good year. He'll have a really good senior year if he stays healthy and everything goes well. But what happens for a guy like him that, you get your degree, but you're making a name for yourself? I think that even though the players shouldn't be paid, I think they should have an opportunity to kind of make some type of revenue off of it. And I think that college basketball is really missing out on opportunities to make money, because we all see it in the NBA, and we see it in the NFL and Major League Baseball. Jerseys sell, programs sell, items with the players on it sell. Yep. So if you have a guy like a Brooks who's there for 4 years and fans fall in love with them, you mean to tell me they can't sell jerseys and they won't make some revenue off of it and cut the player some slack, let the player get some of the profit from it?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great point that you made, because he is a great example of it. He's a guy who we've seen Roy Williams kind of groom, and he wasn't that good of a player early on. Obviously you're a Division I basketball player, you're good, but he's come a long way from where he started, right? So with that being said, he has made a name for himself, and that is a reason to keep some of these players in college basketball and not have them all run over to the G League if they get the opportunity to, because you are giving them, you're giving them a little bit of cash to keep them around, and I guess it's a good point to make also that even students who are in college have opportunities to work part-time jobs and things like that these college basketball players, some of them, it's like having a full-time job. You're just not getting paid for it. So if some of them aren't going to go to the pros, at least gives them, some type of income for when they leave college if they can't get a full-time job right away. But kind of bouncing off of that, another way to look at it are the players who run away from college in the one and done season who really aren't ready for that, and how they throw away that college opportunity to go for the money, which I completely understand. But sometimes you are not ready for that. And just because you're a top prospect in high school, don't feel obligated that you need to go and be a one and done because that's what everyone else is doing. And a good example of that is the 2010 Kentucky team. I believe his name was Daniel Orton. He was one of the centers. He barely got any playing time, and he ran just like all the other freshmen. I mean, I don't want to compare him to John Wall, who was the number one pick in the draft, but you're a freshman on the same team, and what happened to him? He might have been a role player for a few years, was like the last pick in the first round or something like that. I don't get that. I just don't agree with it. I think some of these players need to kind of like take a step back and like assess the situation and realize that you don't need to run for the money if you have more room for improvement at the college level and to learn from some of these legendary coaches. So
Yeah, and you mentioned, and Orton's a good one. You could go back to Tony Bradley, a guy who didn't even start in college, and he went. Nazir Little didn't start at Carolina. I know they were good that year, but again, he's another one that you could mention. There's a lot of players you could mention that ran for the money because they had the opportunity to do so. Just because you run for the money doesn't mean that it's going to pan out. So a lot of these guys are under pressure saying to themselves, if I stay here and I don't produce the way that I'm supposed to produce, I'm not going to get that payday. That payday might be a once in a lifetime thing. Or you hate to say injuries, but they come into play. Say you're driving the lane and you tear your ACL. You're never going to be the same. So it's one of those opportunities where when the money's there and the opportunity's present and you've worked so hard in your life to get there, you're going to jump at that opportunity and you're going to say, as much as I love it here, as much as I think that this is a great situation for me, which is why I picked this school, that money and the opportunity to play in the NBA is much more important at this time, especially given the amount of time that a lot of players last in the NBA. The expectancy of a career isn't that long.
Right. And another guy to bring up, and this kind of just goes back to the one and done, and actually, you know what? I'll ask this question first. What would you rather the situation be? Would you rather it be one and done? Would you rather players be able to leave high school and go straight to the NBA, enter the NBA draft? Or would you rather them kind of expand college and make it more of like a 2 years? You have to at least be like there for 2 years. I believe that's very similar to what college football is. So, but I'm talking college basketball right now. What would you rather?
Well, I'm going to kind of combine two of your options. I think that you have to give a little to get a little, and I think that the NCAA should allow players to declare out of high school. But here's my proposal on it. I think that every high school player in the country has to get rated by the NBA scouts. I think that if you're a highly touted prospect, obviously you're not going to rate every single player who's going to Division I colleges. You're not going to. It's just not feasible. But the players that are 5 and 4 stars, possibly even 3s, should be evaluated by the NBA. And there should be a board that kind of dictates, this is where we project them to go, and give these kids a little bit more of an opportunity to understand what kind of player they are, where the NBA sees them fit. And I think that would help out a lot of players, because a lot of guys would jump and say, I'm going to get drafted out of high school, and then, oops, you're a second round pick and you're cut in summer camp. But in the same token, if players declare out of high school, I think that if you commit to a college, I think you should have to stay at least 2 years. I think that they should push it back. So giving the option to declare in high school, and players can elect to or not to do that, but it would give them another year they'd have to stay on their college grounds.
I was like kind of smirking a little bit because when you said you were going to mix them, I knew what you were going to say, and you said what I was thinking. So I think that's a good proposal if that ever came up. I mean, like I said, I'm not a fan of the one and done. I like a part of me, I was very, very young when they created kind of like the one and done. We call it the one and done, but I don't know if it's actually called the one and done.
I don't know. We could call it the one and done.
We just all call it the one and done. Yeah. There's something involving eligibility. But the point is, when LeBron was drafted in 2003, I was very, very young, right? And when Dwight Howard was drafted in 2004, I was very, very young. And then they did away with that. A part of me wants to see some of these top high school prospects take their game to the NBA level. And I want to see the top high school prospect, being defended by a guy like Damian Lillard or Kemba Walker. And I want to see that, because not every player that would declare for high school is the next Kobe Bryant, Kevin Garnett, LeBron James, Dwight Howard. You could be the next Kwame Brown, who, you have to throw into the conversation, one of the biggest busts in NBA history with the first pick in the 2001 draft. So that's something to talk about. But I do agree that if you're going to go to college, I would like to see you stay for more than a year and try to build that chemistry back up. And as a North Carolina fan, if we get a top recruit, knowing that, wow, you're not just here this year. Like, we don't have to win this year, but we could build something into next year. And now you're kind of stockpiling the teams with top prospects from this year, top prospects for next year. They're coming together. You try to think of some of the teams, like some of the Duke or Kentucky teams a few years back, the team with Anthony Davis. Imagine them coming back for a sophomore year. How does that change the landscape of college basketball? Are you going to have teams who repeat as champions? I think it adds to it. I think when you have a team like that Kentucky team going for a second year back to March Madness, you're telling me that's not going to drive up the ratings? We're talking Anthony Davis is a superstar, and to see him for 2 years, we all knew he was going to be a superstar after that 1 year. So that would, for me as a fan of the NBA and a fan of college basketball, that's where my interest lies, instead of these players going to college for 1 year. And it also gives people like Zion Williamson an opportunity to go and chase the money right away. Because God forbid he got seriously injured when his shoe pretty much exploded against North Carolina. Where would he be? Like, seriously, where would he be right now if he did some damage to his foot, leg, ankle, whatever it was? I mean, that could change his entire career. But luckily, he got through it. He sat out a few games. Luckily, he sat out that game. He picked up the W. But then he goes to the pros, and now he's a multimillionaire, and he's going to be the next big thing. So I think it gives the top prospects an opportunity to go to the pros out of high school, but also gives them a better reasoning to go based on what you were saying with the scouts and the teams giving an evaluation of them. But it also builds up college basketball to see more of these like dominant teams stay for a little bit more competitiveness, more competition.
Yeah, and that's a really good point too, because now you're stuck for not stuck, but you're there for 2 years. It's going to change how these teams recruit, and it's hopefully going to evenly spread out the landscape of college basketball. Like, think about it. Obviously, and I hate to use Carolina again, but coming into the year, we knew that Cole Anthony was a 1 year rental, unless something terrible happened, then he really didn't perform. But we knew he was going to be a one and done. Duke knew Zion was going to be a one and done. There's guys that you could just say, they're going to be a one and done. You got to enjoy them while they're there. But you bring up that Kentucky team, like, imagine that team coming back for a second year. Or imagine having guys that, you have to force back for another year because that's the new rule. And then it makes you recruit a little bit differently. It allows coaches to build more than just a couple of guys. And it would completely just change the landscape of college basketball. And again, it would give those elite guys that rarely come around the opportunity to say, you know what, the NBA views me as the number one pick. The NBA views me as a middle first rounder. And it gives them a little bit more of an idea of where they are and where they stand.
Yeah, and I quickly just want to run through like some of the names I was talking about earlier, because these aren't just recruits going to like the G League and what the G League's taking these recruits away from college basketball, but we're not going to have the opportunity to see a guy like Jalen Green, the number one prospect coming out of high school, playing college. He's now in the G League. And if you're unfamiliar with what the number one recruit means, it goes a long way. For you to be the number one recruit coming out of high school, if you go on ESPN and you just take a look, ESPN.com, you take a look at some of the recruiting rankings from the past 10 years, look at the number one recruit. They're guaranteed to be, like, almost guaranteed to be a big name in college basketball. You have guys like, I believe it's Kevin Love, John Wall. Like, those are guys who ended up being top picks in the draft. They're still making they're signing massive contracts right now. So you have a guy like Jalen Green we're not going to see, who he actually never actually commit. I don't believe he committed to a college. But you have guys like, and if I'm saying this correctly, Dejan Nix and Isaiah Todd. Nix decommitted from UCLA. Todd decommitted from Michigan. So you have these programs thinking they're relying on these top prospects coming in. And then a few months before the season starts, if the season starts with everything going on right now, they no longer have those players on their roster. So it does change everything. And I guess I have a question to piggyback off of that for Nick. How do you think the recruiting changes for a guy like John Calipari? Like, how does he convince these top prospects to go play for him now over the possibility of making $125,000 in a 5-month span at 18 years old?
Now, that's a really good question, because I don't think there's a right answer to that. To be completely honest with you, and the highlights of Nick are actually showing on the screen. The kid's really good. Like, not gonna lie, like watching his film, he's a really good athlete, and he should translate well. But for a guy like Calipari, man, like, what do you say to these kids? Like, the biggest thing has been, come to my school for 1 year, we'll compete, and I'll set you up in the NBA. Look at my past history. Now these kids are getting money thrown at them and endorsements and other things. How do you really compete with that? And I'm sure a guy like that has tricks up his sleeve. Obviously, he's not a dumb individual. He'll figure it out. But it does change it, because those kids are going to turn around and they're going to say, this is what they're offering me. Why should I come to your school for 1 year when I could further advance myself there? And that's going to be a situation not only for him, but for the big coaches in the country. You're going to see a lot of these coaches start recruiting differently. You might see them start recruiting guys who are more long-term, or maybe not as high of a ceiling. Those 5-star recruits may become more of an issue for teams than they are a help, because they might just say, they might commit and then decommit right away, and it really throws off your whole entire recruiting class.
Yeah, and since we're North Carolina fans, if you're Roy Williams, the head coach of UNC, I'm sure you're still going to spend time recruiting those top prospects, but you might spend a little bit more time on the 3-star, the 4-star recruits, because instead of spending so much time on a guy who you're not even sure if it's going to go to your program, he might go to the G League, he might go to another school. Wouldn't you rather? I don't want to say wouldn't you rather, but they might just spend more time trying to get those guys who aren't the top tier guys and just build them like he's done in the past. Roy Williams has a good track record, a good history of developing guys, and we're seeing it with Garrison Brooks. We saw it with Bryce Johnson. Even a guy like Marcus Page, he was a top recruit, but he got a lot better through his time there. Joel Berry. I mean, we've seen it, and it's going to be interesting. I'm sure a lot of those coaches are thinking right now how this is going to go, and I'm sure a lot of them are frustrated. Got teams like UCLA and Michigan who lost top recruits like that, because I know as North Carolina fans, we have a recruit that's coming in, Caleb Love, who the G League tried getting him, and luckily, he has loyalty to the Tar Heels, and he decided to stay where he is, and he wants an opportunity to learn under Roy Williams and play in the NCAA tournament and possibly win a championship and be remembered forever at a big-time school like North Carolina. And I think that's something that, money aside, that's something that these G League players are not going to get. They're not going to get that experience. And I think a lot of the players who dealt with March Madness this year could kind of back that. Like, some of those top freshmen or some of those seniors who had an opportunity to maybe go to March Madness, but that opportunity was taken away because of Corona, that's something they wish they had back. These players who are going to jump to the G League, they're never going to have that opportunity. So, and even Zion Williamson is another big recruit. We all knew he was going to the pros, but he did admit that he did love his time at Duke. And it was tough to walk away from that, but we all knew he was going to do that.
And it also throws a whole nother wrench in the operation. These coaches have perfected the art of recruiting. They go around and they're like politicians. They say the right things. They know what these kids want. They know how to sell their schools. They're like car salesmen and politicians at the same time. They can do both at once. But now the interesting thing is going to be, you're going to have a lot more guys going to the G League, I think, and you're going to have guys who are going to be one and dones, obviously. But if the transition goes back to recruiting these maybe 3 and 4-star guys that have more of a long-term effect on a program that we've seen in the past, coaching is going to come into play. And these coaches are going to have to do more in developing and getting guys ready to perfect their system and help them win games. Like, yeah, you're going to have your 5-stars that are going to come rolling in for 1 year, and you're going to be able to utilize them. But let's be real. Basketball is not a sport where one guy is going to win you games. If one guy was going to win games, Williamson wins Duke the championship last year. If one guy leads a team, you could make the case for a lot of situations. The best player in the country doesn't always come out as a national champion. So that is also an interesting aspect of it, the coaching side, because this does change the way that coaches are going to have to prepare their programs, and they're going to have to alter not only their recruiting but their everyday operation.
Yeah, and anyone who has a job, your job at your job is to work hard, right? But this is just going to make some of those coaches' jobs a little harder, and you have a guy, I keep bringing up Roy Williams, but Roy Williams is a guy who he's known for developing those players, right? He puts a lot of time and effort, and I'm sure those other coaches do too, but he puts a lot of time and effort in developing these 3-4-star guys. We have a guy like Calipari works hard in a different way. He works hard because every year he has a brand new starting 5 because his 5 freshmen just went elsewhere. But the point that I'm trying to make is it's actually harder now for John Calipari because Roy Williams is used to developing those 3 or 4-star guys. Calipari might not get the 5-star guys he's used to. Now he's going to have to spend the time bringing in 3 and 4-star guys who might have to start on his team and develop them. So it's definitely going to be a new route for a guy like him. And I don't mean to keep throwing Calipari into the fire, but he started all of this. Like, he really did. Like, he is the one who got the one and done going. And personally, I'm tired of hearing his excuses every year. Like, every year during March Madness, he has to throw it out there and say that, well, I have 5 new guys every year. Well, that's your way of recruiting. So stop complaining about it.
You're 100% right on that. I just couldn't help but laugh when you were saying that because it's true. The thing that kept coming into my head as you were talking was the status of John Calipari at Kentucky. Not to say that he's going to get fired, but say the game changes. Say the G League does thrive. It could flop. It could thrive. You could see a lot of these 5-stars go that route. Say he stops recruiting these 5-stars, and it's not the same old Kentucky. And somebody from the NBA comes calling and says, look, we want you to take over our franchise. Does he jump to the NBA?
Yeah, I know. And I think another point to make from that is Kentucky, personally, and I know they had a good year this past year, but the past few years, I'm not seeing the same Kentucky teams that I saw when this all got started. Like, even the recruits are not going to the pros and becoming as big of a thing as some of these other players. So do you think maybe some of these recruits are looking at that? Like, do you think maybe a guy like Jalen Green looked at it and said, yeah, Calipari, you've been convincing these prospects of the past to go there and that I'm going to be a top pick. But those guys aren't really translating that well to the NBA. Maybe instead of doing that, I want to go and learn from G League coaches and get that experience because I think it might benefit me more long term.
Yeah, and that's another aspect of it too, is the fact of you could throw guys into the G League, and like I said a little earlier, they're playing against NBA caliber players. You're playing against guys that are on the hinge of being a call-up in the NBA. Like, they're no slouches. But you're learning from guys who have been in camps, in training camps. You've learned from guys who have worked with NBA coaches, with some of the best coaches in college basketball in the game. You're getting experience that you might not get at that collegiate level. Like, yeah, it's nice to say, yeah, oh, look at me, John Calipari, I'm getting 5-star recruits, and they're all starting for 1 year. We're losing in the second round of the tournament, and that's it. But to go into the G League, yeah, you might not get the attention because who knows how it's going to translate in terms of viewership or whatnot. You don't really, you hear about it, but how many people really do tune into it unless you're really avid of a basketball fan? And you're sitting there and you're saying to yourself, man, this is a really interesting predicament. I could better enhance my game in both ways, but if I go the college route, it might not translate the way that I'm hoping it will.
Right. And once again, a lot of good points. Like, I love talking college basketball. I love it. March Madness is my favorite sporting event. I'm a big fan of a lot of sports, but there's just something different about college basketball. And actually, like, a quick funny story about North Carolina and the reason that I know I'm a North Carolina fan. Nick was actually with me the day I became a North Carolina fan. We always laugh about it because I think if you hear two guys saying they're North Carolina fans from New Jersey, it looks like that bandwagon type of feel. You go to this like big time program and become a fan of them. But it was actually the day my Nick and I's grandfather had passed away, and my aunt picks us up from school, elementary school, and me and Nick decide we need to get our mind off things. So we turn on PlayStation 2 and we play NCAA March Madness 2006. And Raymond Felton, a former North Carolina Tar Heel, was on the cover. And we decided to play the March Madness mode. And I don't know what it was, but I didn't know anything about college basketball. I loved the NBA, didn't know anything about college basketball, but I fell in love with the North Carolina Tar Heels colors. And from there, I became a huge North Carolina fan. And it's just always funny to go back to that. So I wanted to throw that in there in case people think we're just some like bandwagon fans of like one of the top tier teams. But we've been talking about basketball a lot too. But I know you did a lot of research on the one and done and how it's a little bit different in college football. So if you want to jump into that, unless you have anything more to say about college basketball, but I'll jump into football too if you want.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, we're not those bandwagon Carolina fans. They're coming to New Jersey for the first time in a very long time. Come December, so I'm sure that we're going to try our best to get tickets for that contest. But before we get into the NFL and college football version of it, I want to ask you a question. I'm going to put you in the shoes of a top player in the country. Okay, you're a 5-star. What position do you want to play?
Let's go shooting guard.
You're a shooting guard. You're the top shooter in the country. Every school wants you. You have offers from Kentucky, Duke, North Carolina, Virginia. You name it, they're offering you, right? You commit to what school? Give me a school.
North Carolina.
He goes to North Carolina. He's going to hold hands with Roy Williams. They're going to have a great time in Chapel Hill. Now, the G League calls, and they come and say, Kyle, look, $125,000. You're an elite prospect. Come play for us for 5 months. We're going to give you all this stuff to help you out. We're going to give you academic scholarships. We're going to give you opportunities to learn from the best in the game. We're going to give you that prime opportunity to earn a payday while playing and showing yourself to every NBA team on a daily basis. How do you decide? What do you think goes into your thought process as to how you would decide what to do?
Yeah, that's a tough decision, especially knowing like I'm a diehard North Carolina fan. But then again, you're 18 years old. You have an opportunity to learn from like minor league system coaches, right? You have a chance to make $125,000. You get 5 months of experience in that and enter the NBA draft, being scouted by the best of the best organizations. I think what would go into it was obviously I would have to sit down with, Roy Williams and his staff. How are you going to develop me? What's my playing time like? What are you offering me that's going to be better than the money and the opportunities from the G League? And then I would also have to sit down with people of the G League and see, like, just because I would be an elite prospect joining the G League, am I going to play? Because it's a lot different. Like, yes, I'm making $125,000, but if I'm not playing, that's not going to help me translate well to the NBA. So my $125,000 might be the best I get in my entire career. Whereas if I go to college, if I'm surrounded by a good supporting cast, not only am I getting that college experience, but I'm also learning from Roy Williams, who we know is capable of developing players. So, wow, that's a tough decision. That's a tough decision.
That's why I threw you under the fire.
This sounds absolutely crazy. This sounds probably crazy, but I think if you're telling me right now, if this is happening, I know this is very new. These prospects are taking a huge risk by going in the direction of the G League. I think based on history, I would probably go to North Carolina because I would have faith in what Roy Williams has done. And you might end up telling the Kobe White story after this on how he convinced them and how Roy Williams does care. Like, he's not going to be a selfish coach and keep you there if he knows you're able to go to the league. So it sounds crazy, but I would pass on the money because I think long-term learning under Roy Williams would help me more.
Yeah, I really like that thought process, how you spun that, because the playing time does come into effect. Like, these guys are going to go to their college.
Yeah.
They're going to play. They're going to find a role. It's very unlikely where you're going to have a 5-star really riding the bench. But that's an interesting point. And as a fan, like, if I was thrown into that situation, it'd be very hard for me to turn down an offer from Carolina, being such a diehard fan and playing for the coach that I grew up watching. It's something that you could write a book about. It's like a dream. So for me, I'm in the same boat. I might go that route. Even though the money's enticing, I would have faith that Roy would put me in a good spot to not only make good money in the NBA, but be successful in the NBA. And the Kobe White story I love. I go back to it all the time. After his freshman year, we all know how good Kobe White was at Carolina. They had their end of the season meeting, and the Carolina coaches knew what was coming. Kobe White wanted to come back, but from what the NBA scouts said, he was ready for the NBA. So Roy and his staff, as they've been known to do, told Kobe, you have to go to the NBA. It's your best choice. It's your best option. And they, a lot of coaches would probably be selfish and say, I want you to stay. I want you to help build my program. But at the end of the day, they really had the betterment of the player in mind. So again, I think that a lot of these coaches and a lot of these programs do look out for the best for each and every player in their organization. I want to hear people's thoughts on this as well as we kind of transition over to the college football side of it. Give us some comments in our comment section. I will read them off as we get them. Our good friend Kurt said it would be easy for him to go to the G League. So I know that the money's enticing to him. And he's also locked and loaded for Broncos opening day. I'm sure he can't wait for his Broncos to slap around our Jets on Thursday night a couple of weeks into the season.
This NFL schedule just came out. I did notice we have the Broncos on that Thursday night, knowing that Kurt is a Broncos fan, and we've been talking about it the past few weeks. I don't know why Nick had to bring it up, but now it's in my head that we're going to get smacked by the Broncos because I think they're a much more improved team. So
we're going to have Kurt on the show because it's a Thursday night and because we do our show. We're going to obviously have to move the show up to 7 o'clock, so we're going to have Kurt on that night to discuss that.
Yeah, that'd be good to have him on.
So Kurt, don't schedule anything that night. You'll be on our show. We'll talk about what's going on. And we do have a comment. Actually, we have a listener from we have a Duke fan. I'm not going to say her name. She says, do you think that the G League will ultimately weaken college basketball? Kyle, give us your thoughts.
Oh, that's a good question. I think it's hard to say right now. I think it's gonna depend on some of these top recruits that went there. How are they gonna fare? How are they gonna play there? Then where are they gonna be placed in the draft? Because if you have a guy like Jalen Green go in and he plays all right, doesn't really he doesn't take over the league, plays solid, but kind of falls to maybe 8 or 9 in the draft where he was projected to be number 1. But a kid from Duke, who was projected to go 8 or 9, moves up to 1. That's going to go to show that the college basketball kids still got it. They're actually improving better than where the G League prospects would be at. So that's a good question, Nick. What do you think about that?
I think no. And yeah, it's going to take talent away, ultimately, and obviously, kids that are very talented and gifted, you're simply losing them, and you're losing seeing them at least for a year. But at the end of the day, and you say it perfectly because you love college basketball more than anybody I know. At the end of the day, you're going to have the Duke-Carolina rivalry. At the end of the day, you're going to have Calipari chasing greatness. You're going to still have these players leaving it on the line because they have aspirations to not only continue their careers, but to advance to the NBA. You're going to have those kids that lay it out on the line and the crowd's going crazy. You're going to see the swarms of colors in the crowd. I don't think college basketball is going to be impacted by it. Yeah, the talent's going to be impacted, but at the end of the day, it just opens up an opportunity for somebody else. And I think that opportunity is going to make a difference for a lot of players. It's going to impact the lives of many players who do end up going the college route. And I think it's going to be a fun experience. You're going to see guys that you might not have heard of in the recruiting process. You might have these 3 and 4-star guys that are now being thrusted into a starting role or a bigger role. And they might say, I want to stay 3 or 4 years. I like this place. I love this atmosphere. And I don't think it's going to impact it. I think, yeah, talent wise, you're going to lose some of the top guys, but at the end of the day, college basketball is still college basketball, and you're going to still have that same competitive nature, and I think it's just never going to change.
That's another good point. And you kept saying at the end of the day, and I was thinking you have to say at the end of the day, March Madness is not going to change either. That's always going to be there. It doesn't matter what players are on the court. Everyone loves March Madness. It's like I might have mentioned it before. It's the best sporting event. And you did remind me of something also about that atmosphere and what would go into making my decision to go to a college like North Carolina over the G League if I had the opportunity. And that's also because let's say you go to the G League and you go to the NBA draft, but you don't really turn out to be anything. You don't turn out to be what you were projected to be. But if you go in the college route and you don't end up getting to the NBA at all, at least let's say you win a championship or you set some records at a school like North Carolina, you're going to always be remembered because your jersey is going to go up in the rafters next to guys like Michael Jordan, Tyler Hansbrough, James Worthy, and that's the difference. You don't know if you're going to make it in the pros, but you know you have an opportunity to make a name for yourself and be remembered at one of the greatest schools of all time. So that would also go into my decision making too.
We just got a really interesting question from our friend Kurt, and he says, and I'm going to read this because I have the comments coming right from here. As college basketball fans like we are, he asks, would you rather have the Duke-UNC rivalry like years ago where players stayed all 4 years, or have them play now with better players but one and dones?
I think, I know, like maybe I wasn't able to watch years and years ago, but when I first started watching college basketball, I did get a feel for a little bit of that because even back in 2006, when I became a fan of them, like the Tar Heel teams and the Duke teams, they were there for a little bit. Like you had guys like J.J. Redick, you had guys like Hansbrough, who at the time was a freshman, but it led up until 2009 where he stayed there. I love the part of college basketball where those players stay because now it's like there's a battle their junior year, and let's say you lose, both games, both Camden and Chapel Hill. Camden. Cameron Indoor. I caught myself. Cameron Indoor. I'm losing my train of thought now. But let's say you say that, you have an opportunity to come back the next year, and it just adds more fuel to the fire, and that boosts up TV ratings. Like Duke North Carolina is arguably the best rivalry in sports. Like every year, it's amazing, and to see how close head to head they are in everything, like wins, points, statistics, it's crazy. I would love to go back to those years of seeing those guys there for years and the head-to-head battles year after year. What do you think, Nick? Good question, by the way, Kurt.
Yeah, what a question, and I agree with you. First and foremost, you could put an NBA All-Star team together and play one-and-dones, and it would be intense and whatnot, but there's just something about that feel of, having guys around for 3 or 4 years, and those guys, say you're in Chapel Hill and Duke steals a win from you, right? Take this year, perfect example. Duke steals a win against them. You mean to tell me that if that happened years ago with the guys like Sean May, Raymond Felton, that didn't boil until they met again? That's the kind of thing that I feel brings the intensity. I would love to see that again. I miss the days where you had those guys that were around all the time for 3 or 4 years. You can even go back a couple of years where you had the Joel Berrys and the Theo Pinsons and Kenny Williams and Luke Mays, like the guys that you can watch grow throughout a program, and you see their highs and lows, the ups and downs. So for me, that's an easy question. I would love to see that again, where both teams are loaded up with guys who are committed to the program long term.
And you could even think about when people got a little bit more physical. When Gerald Henderson kind of cheap shots Tyler Hansbrough back in 2006, what do you think Hansbrough came back and did the next year? Like that was fuel to the fire. He wanted to go after him. They wanted to pick up the win. And I also think the players returning to school, Duke's a great example of that because you always see that one player from Duke. It was back then with Christian Laettner. Then it became J.J. Redick. You had Kyle Singler and John Shire. And then most recently it was Grayson Allen. Like those players become hated for being that player at Duke who stayed there and stayed there and stayed there. That adds to the sport. So like I said, I keep going back to this. I don't like the one and done. I love when players stay there. I think it just adds more to the sport, and it adds more from more enjoyment from a fan's perspective.
Now, before we get into the other side of things in terms of the NFL and whatnot, I know we've been talking about it for a couple of minutes now. Out of those guys that you mentioned, I know we're supposed to hate Leitner. I know it's supposed to be a situation where we're supposed to hate that guy. But out of that group,
Yeah.
the only one I truly can't stand is Grayson Allen. I don't know about you, and I know Reddick is a tough subject for us. I know he was good at Duke and whatnot, but him in the NBA, he doesn't really bother me. But Grayson Allen, that guy bothered me.
Yeah. I mean, we know, you know for sure my hatred towards JJ Redick when I first started with the North Carolina, becoming a fan of them. But yeah, Grayson Allen's the thing with JJ Redick was he was just a good player on a polarized program, and we were North Carolina fans, so you didn't like that. But he wasn't a bad guy, and I like him a lot in the pros. Like he's a good dude. But Grayson Allen is not like he's just like he's a hated player. He's not even polarized. Like people just don't like him. But here's a sleeper that I never liked, Greg Paulus. He's up there with Grayson Allen. I never liked him. I don't. There's reasons I won't get into them, but I never was a fan of the guy.
Yeah, he's kind of like Grayson Allen now that you mention it. But preparing for today's show was really interesting to see that Harbaugh in Michigan over there had a couple of interesting points in regards to the NFL draft. And like I mentioned earlier in the show, the NFL doesn't allow players to declare till after their junior year. So a lot of guys are stuck in the program. But Harbaugh is kind of taking the stance that it should be different. And from what I understand, I read through it, but there's a lot to his letter that he did talk about. He is basically saying that a player in their freshman or sophomore year should be eligible to declare for the draft. And if they're not picked within the first 244 picks, they have the option to go back to school. I think it's just opening the door for players, and I think that he's trying to help advance players in their craft because, let's be honest, just like the NBA, the NFL, a lot of people say, stands for not for long. So as a college coach, it's interesting to me to see a guy like him kind of say, let these kids explore their draft options. But in the same token, I understand where he's coming from because these kids are at a disadvantage. One injury, one tough break, you struggle. It really hurts your draft stock. And you can name guys throughout the years. And a good one I think of is Jake Fromm. When he was a freshman, a lot of people thought he was going to be the consensus number 1 overall pick.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. The comments that Harbaugh made, I feel like I would actually maybe, I don't want to say expand it a little bit, but I guess, yeah, I'll say expand a little bit. You said 244, within those picks? If they're not
picked
within
they have
those?
to go within the first 244 picks, according to his statement.
Okay, so I feel like I would even make it maybe the first 200 picks. Give some of those players an opportunity to go back if they could. I don't know if that would be passed. I don't even know if his comments are going to go somewhere, but I would expand to that extent. But you mentioned Jake Fromm, and I think another example is a guy like Trevor Lawrence, too, another big-time college quarterback where he's still going to go. Unless he has a massive injury and it's career-ending or something, he's going to be a top pick in the draft next year. But there were people saying that he should have been able to go to the pros after his true freshman year of college after he won a national championship. So it does affect people. And I'm trying to think off the top of my head of a player that ended up maybe being injured and wasn't able to go when he could have because of this rule where it really messed up his career. Maybe a name will come to mind, but Fromm and Lawrence are good examples, I think, of just players who could have left and they've had to stay. And a guy like Fromm, he went so late in the draft where it could have changed a few years before that.
Yeah, and you look at some of these running backs, too. You can make a case for them, the workload that they're receiving in college. Those guys could go, if you have a good freshman or sophomore year, you're getting the bulk of the carries your junior year. That's a wear and tear on your body. So it does have a predicament.
Right.
It does play a big role in these guys' futures. Now, my question to you is it time for the NCAA to make one set pair of rules in regards to players being eligible for drafts?
I feel like it's like Iron's kind of playing tug of war right now because I feel like it's hard to say this, but there's more of a reason for a player to stay a little long, get to the next level and perfect the physicality of it. Maybe I'm not a college football player, so I can't really. I can't sit here and say like from firsthand experience on that, but I don't really like at the same time how college basketball players only have to wait 1 year and college football players have longer. And I'm asking you what's your take on that too. But before I say that, I also want to note that you don't actually have to play all three. Like you're not graduate. You don't have to leave college as a junior. You could also leave as a redshirt sophomore. So some players we know do that too. But Nick, for the question you asked, what's your answer for that?
An answer on that. I believe that we did lose connection for a few seconds there. So if we did lose connection, we do apologize.
Okay.
But again, I think that a universal set of rules would be nice. I think that they need clarity. I think that it should be across the board. Do I think it happens? No, but I do think that it would be the best for everyone involved.
Yeah, I agree with that. Once again, a tough decision that they would have to come by. I'm not sure if they're ever really going to change rules because some of these rules have been going on for so long, and it's technically been working. Obviously, not everyone's going to agree with one thing, but yeah, I think there's reasoning behind the decisions that they made, and I think they are justified to an extent. But yeah, the point you made is also a good one.
So I think we covered everything we want to talk about tonight, and again, we apologize for the little bit of technical difficulties that we have been experiencing over the last couple of minutes. We hope that you didn't miss any of our content tonight. But Kyle, give us your final thoughts.
My final thoughts. I mean, this was a fun topic to talk about. Personally, I really liked how our conversation flowed with everything. I know we're both big college basketball fans, and this is a topic that's been pretty relevant lately. And I think it's going to be hot for a while, especially when college basketball rolls around again. And with that being said, I'm hoping college basketball does get started in November. I'm hoping fans are in the stands. I love the sport. I love following it. I love being a North Carolina fan. What's your final thoughts?
I agree with you. I just hope we get sports back soon, man. You know what's bad when I'm staying up till late times watching Korean baseball, man. It's been rough out here, but and again, not to downplay everything that's going on in the world. We're hoping that it gets better very soon. But this was a fun topic, and the one and done is going to be an issue that college teams are going to be dealing with for a while. In the G League, it's going to be interesting to see how it plays out. So, but again, we have a lot of social media they can follow, and I think that we should just let them know again. Delahanty Media on Instagram. You found us on Facebook tonight. Go to Let's Debate Podcast. And again on Twitter at Let's Debate Pod. Remember, if you want some Delahanty Media gear, visit our store listed at the top of the screen. Let's show this shirt again. I got it yesterday, so perfect timing. So pick it up, help us support our brand. Let's Debate gear will be up within the next couple of days. I've been working with our partners at Teespring trying to get those situated for you guys, so help us spread our word. And again, join us next Thursday for our next show. We're excited for our next topic of debate and hope that you ultimately join in for that conversation. So with that being said, my name is Nick Delahanty. Kyle Delahanty is my co-host as always, and there is nobody I'd rather talk sports with than you, Kyle.
Nick, you say it every week, and I couldn't say it more. I love talking sports with you. I look forward to this every week, and we also look forward to you guys tuning in and interacting each week. So with that being said, thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next week.